am here in Cairo. Time for the news bulletin. My name is Alan Mukhtar. I have all the pleasure to be joined with my dear colleague Sarah Slim. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Amal. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will start our news bulletin with the headlines. President Sisi meets Emirati President on regional developments. President Sisi hails Egyptian brokered Gaza ceasefire agreement. And world leaders say long-awaited Gaza ceasefire agreement is an opportunity for peace and stability in the Middle East.
Welcome back. The news in detail. President Abdel-Fattah al-Sisi today met with Emirati President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed at the start of his visit to the United Arab Emirates. The two leaders discussed boosting bilateral ties, particularly in the economic, trade and investment fields, serving the interests of both countries. The meeting also touched on the current regional developments and means of restoring security and stability in the Middle East. The two presidents hailed a recently brokered ceasefire agreement in Gaza and reiterated the keenness on its implementation to ensure the immediate halt of Palestinian bloodshed. They also stressed the necessity of assessing sufficient and unhindered humanitarian aid to end the humanitarian suffering of Gazans in the war-torn Strip. On Lebanon, both sides lauded the election of President Joseph Aoun being a crucial step towards restoring stability in the Arab country. Similarly, they called for maintaining the territorial integrity and sovereignty of conflict-hit countries Syria, Sudan, Libya, Yemen and Somalia.
President Abdel-Fattah al-Sisi welcomed the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, which was finally brokered after more than a year of intense mediation efforts by Egypt, Qatar and the United States. Via his social media account, President al-Sisi asserted that Egypt is committed to its supportive vow for a lasting peace and will always be a loyal partner in defense for and in attainment of the Palestinian legitimate rights.
A high-ranking Egyptian official has earlier said that Egypt was ready to assess the largest amount possible of aid to the Gaza Strip after the recently brokered ceasefire agreement. The source added that there is an ongoing coordination on opening the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing before international humanitarian aid, which will help promote conditions in the war-torn Strip.
Ceasefire mediators, Egypt, Qatar and the United States had announced that the Palestinian resistance group Hamas and the Israeli occupation have agreed to pause the devastating genocide war in the Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdurrahman al-Thani, said that the ceasefire would go into effect on Sunday and that its success would depend on both sides acting in good faith in order to ensure that this agreement doesn't collapse. The three-phase ceasefire deal promises the release of nearly 100 hostages held in Gaza and hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli occupation jails, and to allow hundreds of thousands of people displaced in Gaza to return to what remains of their homes. It would also flood desperately needed humanitarian aid into the territory ravaged by 15 months of genocide war.
Shortly after the ceasefire agreement announcement, U.S. President Joe Biden gave himself the credit, saying that he had announced the outline of the three-phase ceasefire agreement on the 31st of May. The first phase would last for 6 weeks and include a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli occupation forces from densely populated areas of Gaza, and the release of a number of hostages in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Humanitarian assistance would surge with hundreds of trucks entering Gaza each day. The second phase would include the release of all remaining hostages, and Israeli occupation forces would withdraw withdrew from Gaza. The third phase calls for the start of major reconstruction of Gaza. Meanwhile, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump celebrated the agreement, saying that his threats to Hamas and his pressures on the occupation side deserve credit as well.
Commenting on the ceasefire agreement, the acting head of Hamas Political Bureau and chief Palestinian negotiator Khalil al-Hayya said that the Israeli occupation failed in achieving its targets, told or untold, from the devastating genocide war. He said that the ceasefire deal represents a new phase which will focus on Gaza rebuilding and recovering. Large crowds of joyful Palestinians took to the streets across the war-torn Gaza Strip when the agreement was announced, cheering and honking car horns. Palestinians are marching in part of the Israeli-occupied West Bank, and some have chanted in the hours after the Gaza ceasefire was announced Wednesday evening. Separately, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the ceasefire agreement with Hamas is still not complete and the final details are being worked out. Netanyahu's statement comes after some of the hostages' relatives protested after the fate of the remaining captives.
World leaders hailed the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, saying that the long-awaited deal is an opportunity for peace and stability in the Middle East. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer have celebrated the hostages who are set to return home and mourned the people killed in Gaza Strip since the 7th of October 2023. He promised to surge humanitarian aid to war-weary civilians in Gaza. Chancellor of Scholz of Germany said this ceasefire opens the door to a permanent end to the genocide war and to the improvement of the poor humanitarian situation in Gaza. The French President Emmanuel Macron urged that the agreement must be respected. The hostages freed, the Gazans rescued. A political solution must be found. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed the deal, saying he hoped it would benefit the region and all of humanity and will open the door to lasting peace and stability. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, for his part, said the UN is ready to support implementation of the ceasefire deal and scale up the delivery of humanitarian aid, noting that his top priority is to ease the tremendous suffering caused by this war.
The Palestinian Health Ministry said today that Israeli occupation strikes have killed at least 81 people since a ceasefire deal was announced, as people were
Minister of Foreign Affairs, Migration and Expatriate Affairs Badr Abdulati said that Egypt is looking forward to enhance ties with the UN mission to Libya in a way to serve efforts to reach a settlement for the Libyan crisis. Egypt's top diplomat reiterated that Cairo will continue its efforts to help Libyan parties to reach an agreement to pave the way for holding presidential and parliamentary elections. This came during his meeting with Stephanie Khoury, Deputy Special Representative for Political Affairs in the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, during her visit to Cairo.
Minister of Foreign Migration and Egyptian Expatriate Affairs Badr Abdulati and Sudanese ministers highly appreciated the deeply rooted brotherly ties binding Egyptian and Sudanese peoples. The remarks were made during Egypt's top diplomats' expanded meeting with the Sudanese ministers of Health, Transportation, Justice, Finance and Economic Planning, which as he wrapped up his visit to Port Sudan. Minister Abdulati and the Sudanese ministers said they discussed preparations for the upcoming second forum for businessmen in Sudan, due to be held over the upcoming period to push forward the economic and trade ties between the two countries.
The Israeli occupation army have claimed today that it fired at vehicles in Syria loaded with weapons near a buffer zone between Syria and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The strike reportedly hit a town of Quintira province and killed 3 people, including 2 members of Syria's interim military operations administration and a civilian. Israeli occupation forces have captured the UN-patrolled buffer zone in occupied Golan Heights following former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's fall last month. The occupation military have been also conducting incursions outside the buffer zone.
UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk called for a Syrian national reconciliation process to ensure justice in the country. In the first visit ever by a UN Rights Commissioner to Damascus, Turk met with the head of Syria's new administration, Ahmed al-Shara. Turk had said that he had heard positive statements from Syria's new leadership and that Ahmed al-Shara had assured him of its respect for human rights. The commissioner also called for the international community to urgently reconsider and lift sanctions in Syria, which he said were impacting all Syrians.
Now with the economy news, as Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli chaired the cabinet meeting today at the new administrative capital to review a number of political, economic and social topics in addition to other files on the government's agenda. The cabinet meeting have reviewed the recent inauguration of J-League Group car assembly plant in Egypt and also means to implement President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's directives regarding intensifying efforts to reduce inflation rates. The meeting also followed up efforts to increase spending on education, health and social protection files, in addition to monitoring the markets and assure the availability of basic commodities with reasonable prices.
Minister of Petroleum Karim Badawi reviewed with the Saudi Minister of Industry and Mining Bandar bin Ibrahim means to promote and enhance cooperation and activities in the mining sector. On the sidelines of the Future Minerals Forum in Riyadh, Minister Karim Badawi stressed the significance of the event, describing it as an international platform that gathers strategic partners to discuss the recent developments in the mining industry. For his part, the Saudi minister expressed keen interest to promote joint cooperation with Egypt and increase activities in the mining sector.
Now with the sports news, as Egypt's handball team started the World Championship campaign with a commanding 39-25 victory over Argentina in the opening Group H match in Zagreb, Croatia. The Pharaohs took an early lead, securing a 21-11 win by halftime. The victory marks Egypt's fourth triumph over Argentina in major tournaments, including 3 World Championships and 1 Olympics encounters. The win have placed Egypt on the top of Group H, which also includes Argentina, Croatia and Bahrain. The Pharaohs will play against Bahrain next Friday, targeting to maintain their momentum in the World Tournament.
Inform Imam Ashur continued his impressive performance and scored twice for Al Ahly, securing a 2-0 victory.
Well, with this, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the news bulletin. My name is Amal Mukhtar. I had all the pleasure to be joined with my dear colleague, Sarah Slim. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Amal. It was a pleasure for me to be with you today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching, and stay tuned for the coming updates on the top of the hour. Thank you.